Something is wrong here. What material were they made of? It sounds like the kind of thing that should have a clean answer. You hear the question, and you expect something solid back. One material. Maybe two. Something you can name and move on from. That is usually how this goes. Things are made of something. You ask, you get the word, and the shape of it settles in your head. But here, it does not settle. The answer seems close for a moment, like it should already be obvious. Then something small refuses to fit with it. Not enough to stop you right away. Just enough to make the simple answer feel a little less complete than it should. And once that happens, even the obvious choice starts sounding thinner than expected. Still familiar. Still possible. But not quite able to hold everything in place. So what material were they made of? At first, the material hardly seems worth asking about. The record calls them tablets, and the scenes attached to them behave like stone. Two flat slabs stand against a mountain. Later, broken pieces lie across bare ground. Not bent, not splintered into fibers, but shattered into hard fragments. Then another pair appears, rough cut in the wilderness, and finally the objects are stored in the ark, as if they are expected to endure transport, weather, and generations. If the question is only what they were made of, stone answers almost every visible requirement before the investigation has properly begun. The breakage pattern helps. A material soft enough to be rolled, folded, or scraped thin would not leave the same image at the foot of a slope. Scattered chunks, angular edges, a fracture event rather than gradual ruin. The replacement set also presses in the same direction. A second pair is cut, not woven, cast or hammered. In a camp setting, with rough surfaces and exposed rock all around. The most economical reading is that the first and second sets belong to the same broad class of object. Carved slabs, probably ordinary stone, prepared for inscription and durable enough for storage, in a chest built to protect sacred contents. That explanation settles comfortably because it links language, damage, replacement, and storage into one physical sequence. A dark mountainside, broken pieces on the ground, a fresh pair by the campfire, two tablets inside a gold-covered chest in a dim tint. Every scene holds together if the material is stone. Then the wording around the replacement set starts to press on the edges of that certainty. If the second pair had to be cut from stone, what exactly does that say about the first pair? It sounds confirming at first, like for like, stone replacing stone. Yet the first set is remembered not merely as inscribed, but as given in a way that leaves the material itself oddly unexamined. The narrative spends effort on origin and writing, not quarry, color, grain, or weight. For objects so central, there is no surviving fragment, no named stone type, no physical description beyond the behavior expected of slabs. Even the storage scene raises a practical question rather than closing one. The ark preserves them as durable objects. Yes, but durability is a broad category. Thick enough to survive handling, small enough to fit within a chest, important enough to remain intact through movement. Those are constraints, not identification. A rough-cut pair beside a campfire suggests common workable rock. But if common rock is all that mattered, why preserve the command to cut them again so carefully? Why note the making of the second set at all, unless the first set had already become more than simple stone? For now, the ground still favors stone. The broken pieces demand it. The second set being cut in the wilderness favors it. The chest favors it. Yet the closer the investigation stays with the physical scenes, the more selective the record begins to look. It shows slabs, fracture, replacement, storage. It leaves untouched the one detail that would end the question: what kind of stone these tablets actually were. At first, the material seems settled by the record itself. The instruction is not vague. 2 tablets of stone, cut to match the first heat. That wording narrows the field immediately. Not wood, not metal, not some later imagined substance, but stone prepared in advance and then inscribed. In the most practical reconstruction, the tablets begin as ordinary slabs. Newly hewn faces, rough edges, tool marks still visible where the blanks were shaped. If the second set had to be made, like the first, then the first set must already have been understood as the same kind of object. Paired, flat, durable, and substantial enough to be broken, rather than bent or burned. That fit improves when the tablets are placed beside other covenant monuments. Incised writing on stone is familiar in the ancient world. Public terms, boundary claims, royal decrees, all gain authority when cut into a hard surface that resists alteration. A stone tablet covered in lines of inscription does not look out of place in that company. It looks exactly like the kind of object meant to preserve words beyond a single generation. Even the later storage tradition supports that reading. A wooden chest lined with gold could house something dense and lasting. Thick stone tablets filling its interior make physical sense in a way softer materials do not. For a moment, the case feels almost too clean. Stone explains the command, the matching sets, the breakage, the storage, the permanence. Then the wording presses closer. The command specifies that Moses cuts the tablets, but the writing itself is not treated as ordinary carving. The object is stone, yes, yet the inscription is described as coming from God. That creates an odd division in manufacture. One stage belongs to quarrying and shaping. Another belongs to authorship of a different order. If the material were the main point, the text could have lingered over its quality, source, or finish. Instead, it keeps returning to the writing. Why preserve the stone designation so clearly, then leave the stone itself unnamed? The surviving descriptions make the slabs feel more standardized than expected. The first and second sets are treated as equivalents, not merely replacements. That suggests more than any two rocks will do. Matching objects imply proportion, thickness, and a prepared surface suitable for inscription. A pair of stone slabs standing side by side inside a sanctuary cloth arrangement would need to read visually as a pair, not as two unrelated fragments. Was the stone chosen for workability? For weight? For a face broad enough to receive dense text? The sources do not say, and that silence becomes harder to ignore when the physical demands accumulate. The tablets must be heavy enough to suit sacred storage and durable enough to endure transport, yet still manageable enough to be carried down mountain. They must accept engraving clearly enough to function like a monument stele, but they are not described with the usual identifying details one would expect from a prized material. No color, no quarry, no grain, no hardness, only stone. So the investigation circles back to the same narrowing answer with a fresh irritation inside it. The tablets look most like work stone blanks, cut by Moses and inscribed by God, their authority anchored in permanence rather than rarity. But if the material was straightforward, why does every concrete detail stop at stone, while every extraordinary detail gathers around the writing? At first glance, the material seems settled. The records say tablets, and every surrounding detail behaves as if that means stone. Something breakable, something durable, something that can be stored for generations. Set that beside the later command to cut a second pair from stone, and the simplest reconstruction is hard to avoid. Two slabs, heavy enough to matter, solid enough to survive transport, plain enough to fit the known world of covenant monuments. Then the surface details begin to interfere. One description insists the writing covered both sides. That is easy to repeat and harder to picture. A stone tablet propped in profile, front and back both lined with text, leaves very little of the object behaving like an ordinary inscription surface. Monumental stone usually preserves margins, framing bands, some untouched area where the object can be grasped, lifted, or even visually organized. Here, the remembered image is more complete than that, writing from face to face, edge to edge, as though the slab existed for inscription before it existed for handling. That still does not remove stone from consideration. It only narrows the kind of stone object this could have been in. A pair of compact slabs, thick enough not to snap under their own weight, small enough to be carried down a mountain, fully incised on both faces. Awkward, but possible. The second set being cut from stone by Moses keeps that possibility alive. If the replacement had to match the first, then the first cannot have belonged to some wholly different class of material. But another phrase keeps reopening the question. The tablets are called the work of God. And the writing, the finger of God. Not merely authorized, not merely dictated, made and inscribed in language that does not sound like quarrying, smoothing, ruling lines, and cutting letters by ordinary procedure. The stone faces in the descriptions look finished, exact, almost over-resolved. Smooth planes, sharp characters, no visible hesitation in the kutsa. If this is stone, it is being described through origin rather than geology. That distinction matters because ordinary stone carries ordinary constraints. Letter depth varies. Reverse side inscription affects thickness. Full coverage to the edges invites chipping at corners and stress along the faces. Yet, the remembered emphasis falls elsewhere. Not on tool marks, not on stone type, not on the labor of shaping, but on the completed state of the object. The tablets appear less like carved rock than like stone already answering to inscription. And still, the text does not name any rarer substance. No sapphire, no crystal, no luminous mineral. Those belong to later imagination, not to the earliest material notice. So the investigation circles back to stone, only now not to the first easy version of stone. Not rough slabs with commandments scratched onto them, but something more exacting. Stone whose significance lies in what covers it on both sides, without the usual concessions to human workmanship. That raises the next pressure point. If the first set is described in terms of divine making, and the second set must be cut by Moses like the first, what exactly had to be matched? The material? The dimensions? The finish? Or only the fact of being stone ready for writing? The answer would decide whether stone is the whole explanation, or only the outer shell of one. The material question should have been settled long ago. The oldest wording says, tablets of stone, and for a while that seems sufficient. Then the later displays begin to interfere. In one synagogue case, a blue slab sits under lamplight, polished to a depth that common rock does not usually hold. It is not presented as a guess. It is presented as memory. Nearby inscriptions from later tradition name sapphire outright, as if the matter had merely waited for proper reverence to catch up with it. That would explain something the plain reading never quite satisfies. Why these tablets, unlike ordinary legal monuments, keep attracting language that makes them seem too elevated for rough desert stone. The comparison does not stop there. In manuscript paintings of the divine throne, the platform beneath it is rendered blue, gem-like, almost lit from within. The visual logic is easy to follow. If the throne is associated with sapphire, and the covenant text comes directly from the same divine source, then a precious heavenly substance begins to feel less like embellishment than continuity. A pair of jewel-toned tablets in a painted panel, surrounded by gold ornament, no longer looks decorative. It looks interpretive, almost technical. Sacred origin, sacred material. That reading gains more weight in treasury imagery. Precious stones, worked metal, lamp glow, polished surfaces. Again and again the tablets are placed among materials chosen for rarity and brilliance. Sacred objects tend to migrate upward in substance. Wood becomes overlaid. Cloth becomes embroidered. Vessels become gold. Why would the central written object remain geologically ordinary? Yet, the records that support the blue tablets arrive late, and they arrive already illuminated. The surfaces in those images are too finished, too courtly, too responsive to lamplight. They belong to a world that likes holiness to shine. That does not disqualify them, but it changes the kind of evidence they are. A display object can preserve a memory. It can also preserve a preference. The throne comparison introduces another pressure point. The blue platform in the vision is compared to sapphire, but comparison is not transfer. A throne base, in visionary language, is one thing. The material of portable inscribed tablets is another. The two begin to touch only through association. Once that link is loosened, the physical question returns in a less comfortable form. If the tablets were actually sapphire, what kind of sapphire is being imagined? Not the small transparent gemstone of later jewelry. The scenes show broad slabs, enough surface for writing, enough thickness to survive transport and storage. A blue polished slab of that size belongs less to ornament than to monument. But then the object's behavior becomes awkward. Monumental gem material is not casually available. It must come from somewhere, be cut somehow, and remain identifiable as unusual substance wherever it appears. The later images insist on color and glow. The earlier wording keeps returning to shape, inscription, and sanctity, while leaving the stone unnamed. That omission becomes harder to ignore in the very places where a precious material would matter most. The texts preserve commands, storage, replacement, and reverence. They do not preserve a named gem. So the blue surfaces in the later displays continue to solve one problem: the need for an object worthy of divine writing, while opening another. If the material itself was part of the wonder, why does the earliest record leave the wonder there, in the writing, and not in the stone? At this stage, the material ought to be easy to settle. The instruction for the replacement set is practical. 2 tablets are to be cut again, like the first step. That sounds less like a jewel brought from heaven than a workable substance found where people are already standing. In that light, the image that holds longest is not blue brilliance, but a rough stone blank on desert ground, lying among ordinary rocks of the same color. If the second pair had to be produced in the wilderness, the material had to exist there in reachable form, not as a rare treasure requiring a mine, transport, cutting specialists, and protection. That practical reading gains weight from the surfaces later imagined for the tablets. The edges of a second pair show tool-cut regularity in the mind's reconstruction. Straightened sides, flattened faces, corners adjusted by repeated blows. Those are the marks of preparation, not extraction, from a precious crystal mass. The command itself presses in the same direction. It does not pause over rarity, color, or brilliance. It asks for shape. It anticipates inscription. The object matters because words will occupy it. For a moment, that seems to settle the question. Common stone, selected and cut to receive sacred writing. Then, the setting starts asking for more precision than the text gives. Dusty tablets near a wilderness camp make sense only if the stone can survive transport, handling, ascent, descent, and storage. That narrows the field somewhat. Not crumbly chalk, not soft clay, not some brittle decorative material. Yet no source names the stone type. If the material was ordinary enough to be found nearby, why preserve the command to cut it, but leave the substance unnamed? In legal and ritual texts, named materials often matter. Here, the silence sits beside unusual care about the writing. The physical environment adds another pressure. No quarry appears in the record. No seam is identified. No hauling of heavy blocks is described. The narrative moves directly from command to tablets as though the material were obvious or irrelevant. But if it were irrelevant, why insist on cutting a second set like the first? Similarity of form is clear enough. Similarity of material is implied, though never measured, never tested, never described. That leaves the eye on the objects themselves. Plain stone slabs standing in harsh sunlight, without blue translucence or jeweled shine, fit the wilderness better than sapphire ever did. Nothing in the immediate scene suggests gem extraction. No polished crystal faces. No treasury logic. No mention of value by weight. The tablets belong among camp, dust, wood, and carried burdens. Still, the more ordinary the stone becomes, the stranger the omission feels. A covenant object important enough to be housed, remembered, and replaced is tied explicitly to stone, but not to any identifiable kind of stone. The command secures the category while withholding the substance. That makes the practical answer persuasive. Workable stone, locally obtainable, shaped for inscription, yet it leaves one stubborn question exposed on the surface. If the material was so ordinary, what exactly made these tablets worth describing by origin and writing alone, while the stone itself remained unnamed? Inside the inner chamber, the pair looks manageable at first glance. Each tablet stands thick enough to read as weighty stone, yet compact enough to fit within the ark's confined interior. That proportion answers one practical question immediately. Whatever they were made of, they could be carried, stored, and preserved as enduring objects of worship. Not a monumental stele, not a fragile sheet, but something dense and portable. Stone fits that balance cleanly. The surfaces strengthen that impression. No translucence shows at the edges. No reflective depth suggests crystal. In the chamber's low light, the material reads as matte, smoke-dulled, and ordinary in color. If the question is simply what substance best matches the surviving descriptions, unnamed workable stone seems sufficient. The storage context supports it. A sacred chest is built to house durable contents, and these tablets remain intact long enough to become fixed at the center of covenant memory. Common stone, once inscribed, would do exactly that. Then the profile becomes harder to ignore. Set upright on a support, each tablet shows writing on both faces. Not a title on one side and text on the other, but inscribed surfaces front and back. The edges appear narrow relative to the written area, as though nearly every available plane was used. That detail keeps returning in the records, and it changes the material question. Ordinary stone can certainly be carved, but the more completely the text occupies both sides, the less these objects behave like routine stone monuments. There is no obvious blank margin, no reserved grip area, no practical concession to handling. The tablets remain stone-like in mass, yet the inscription pattern resists the habits of ordinary carving. The chamber itself adds another pressure. Fabric hangs nearby. Wood and gold enclose the space. Smoke has darkened surrounding surfaces over time. The tablets endure among materials that age, warp, stain, and fray. Their significance clearly does not depend on a named mineral. The writing and its origin dominate every description. That seems to settle the matter again. If the tradition cared about sapphire, marble, basalt, or any other specific substance, why preserve the inscriptional memory so carefully while leaving the stone unnamed? But the absence of a name creates its own problem. No quarry mark appears. No color note survives with any consistency. No source region is attached to the material. For an object so central, the silence is unusually complete. The records remember both-sided writing, sacred placement, and continued preservation, yet not the kind of stone. Was the material too ordinary to mention, or too unusual to classify in familiar terms? The tablets in the chamber do not glow. They do not advertise rarity. They occupy space like rock. Still, they are remembered less as shaped matter than as surfaces overtaken by inscription. That leaves the investigation in an awkward position. The strongest physical reading remains stone of no specified type. Thick, portable, durable, suitable for storage. Yet the very features most often recalled are the ones least helpful for identifying stone. Writing on both sides, complete coverage, survival without material label. Holiness attached to authorship rather than substance. So the chamber gives a near answer and withholds the last part. They look like stone. They behave like stone. But the evidence that makes stone convincing is not the evidence that tells us which stone it was. At first glance, the material seems settled before the investigation even begins. The record does not ask for brilliance, rarity, or color. It asks for stone. In the shrine reconstructions, that plain reading still dominates the center. Two unadorned tablets, thick enough to endure handling, compact enough to fit within the ark. Their surfaces treated as durable carriers, rather than decorative objects. Around them, on later walls and in manuscripts, another image accumulates. Blue, luminous, jewel-like. The contrast is hard to ignore. The central objects remain stone. The surrounding memory keeps trying to turn them into something more. That tension would be easy to dismiss as artistic embellishment if the language about the tablets were equally ordinary. It is not. The commands specify stone, and no canonical source names any other substance. That should close the question. Yet the same texts describe writing attributed directly to God, and in some passages the tablets themselves are called the work of God. Ordinary stone can account for weight, storage, breakage, and replacement. It does not easily account for why later tradition kept reaching for sapphire. The physical details pull in both directions. The tablets are remembered as substantial enough to anchor covenant worship, and survive long enough to be housed in the ark. That favors workable rock, something available, cuttable, transportable. A wilderness setting offers no obvious route for quarrying large gem material, and no source pauses to mention extraction, polishing, or transport of precious stone. If the second set had required rare blue mineral, the silence around procurement becomes conspicuous. The command emphasizes shape and inscription, not exceptional substance. Again, the answer seems to settle. Unnamed stone. Nothing more specific. Then, the surfaces come back into view. Writing on both sides is not a decorative flourish. It is repeated memory. A tablet shown edge-on in reconstruction looks narrower than expected once both faces are fully inscribed. If the text runs to the edges, with no blank margin left for gripping, the object begins to look less like a conventional monument slab, and more like something made under different assumptions about inscription. The material can still be stone, but not quite the kind of stone imagined when one pictures rough covenant markers standing in open ground. That is where the sapphire tradition regains a foothold, not from explicit identification, because there is none, but from pressure created by the object's status. A divine throne vision is compared elsewhere to sapphire. Later communities, already surrounded by gold vessels, polished surfaces, and sacred ornament, place shining blue tablets into visual memory, as if common rock no longer matched the holiness attributed to the originals. The paintings preserve reverence efficiently. They preserve material memory poorly, and the evidence left behind does nothing to settle the matter. No fragment survives. No label, no quarry trace, no mineral residue, no dimension fixed by recovered remains. Inside the Ark traditions, the tablets remain present as sacred contents but materially anonymous. In the final inventory of what can actually be supported, stone keeps returning because every direct instruction points there, and nothing canonical dislodges it. Yet the object described is never merely geological. It is stone without a name type. Stone carrying writing treated as unlike normal inscription. Stone remembered so intensely that later generations kept repainting it as heaven-colored. The material answer narrows to rock, and the question stays open inside that narrowing. What kind of stone leaves readers satisfied only until the next detail is read again?